Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning at the IAB's Research Morning. My name is Elizabeth and I'm the Head of Research and Measurement at the IAB UK. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We've got a very packed agenda for you. So I'm just going to do a very quick introduction before we go straight into all of the wonderful speakers we've got this morning. First of all, as always, I'd like to do a big thank you to UKOM for being our sponsor this morning for the research breakfast. We're going to hear from UKOM very shortly as well, but thank you to them for, as always, for being our sponsor. It's always great to have them on board with us. So we have a very packed agenda for you this morning, but some really, really great speakers. So after I do my quick introduction, I'm going to hand straight over to Julie at UKOM, who's going to give us the latest industry insights from UKOM. After Julie, we've got Kate at Amobi, who's going to be sharing some insights into the way marketers are rethinking their strategies post-COVID. Then we have Peter at GumGum, who's going to talk through a really interesting neuroscience study into the effectiveness of contextual ads, followed by Mike, who is at Lumen, and he's one of the founding partners of the Attention Council. So he's going to share what the Attention Council is about and all of its best practice measures. Then we will be speaking with Teresa and James at Kantar, who are going to be drawing on some of their insights into how brands can stay relevant to consumers and whilst maintaining trust and privacy. And then finally, we've got Alex at Unruly, who's going to talk through what they've learned about how to create memorable ads. Finally, I think we'll have time at the end for any Q&A for questions that you've got for any of our panelists. So just a note on the Q&A, what we will do is we will have questions right at the end for all of the speakers, but if you do have any questions during any of the presentations, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom. You can submit any questions and then we'll come back to them at the end and try and answer them as best as we can. But that's it from me. What I will do now is hand straight over to Julie at UKOM. So Julie, I'll stop sharing my screen and hopefully you can share yours.
Share my screen, so hopefully you can see it. Can you see that? Is that working?
Yes, we can see that. Thanks, Julie.
Excellent. So you'll probably notice that I'm not on camera. Apologies for that. A couple of reasons. One, my broadband connection is not great. I think it's better to have my camera off. And secondly, the location of my camera on my computer is at the bottom. So it means that you spend most time looking at my nose. So it doesn't really add very much, I'll be honest. So good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Julie Forey. That is what I look like because I'm not on camera. But you'll probably, if you've been to any of these research breakfasts before, you'll have seen me here because we sponsor it. So we're at every one. And for UKOM, UKOM stands for UK Online Measurement. We're an independent trade body owned by the IAB, ISBA and the AOP. And we're really here to ensure there's a trusted, transparent, third-party online audience measurement based on people in the UK. Now, our current partner is Comscore, and every month, we've been analysing their data to look at the impact of COVID-19 on UK online usage. At the last research breakfast, if any of you were there, I presented March data. That was only 1 week into lockdown. And subsequently, we've looked at data in April. We've done a report that's on our website. And what I'm going to show you today is what's happening between April and May. So are we seeing the same trends or is anything changing as lockdown starts to ease? So first of all, just looking at average time spent online per day, looking at different demographics over the period. So January is pre-pandemic, April is peak pandemic, and May is, I guess, post the peak as people starting to get used to the new normality of living with the virus. And what you can see here is that time online peaked in April, surpassing 4 hours if you look at the 18 plus figures. And between January and April, adults spent an extra 37 minutes online per day amongst those who use the internet. Time did drop back slightly in May. Average daily time was down 8 minutes. But what you can see is that time in May is higher, still significantly higher than January. April peaking is even more remarkable given that April has one less day. So one less day to knock up those minutes. But as you can see, this is typical that older people generally spend less time online than younger people, but we did see big increases. And if you were on the breakfast last month, you'll have seen these figures as well. Just going to do a quick recap on what happened between January and April, basically looking at those categories that were most negatively impacted and those categories that seemed to benefit most from the pandemic. And obviously, again, going to touch on April because it was the peak month, and then Following that, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've seen in May. So the categories that we believe are the 8 sectors that were most impacted from a negative point of view, either from an audience or time. And just remember, what we're looking at here is people using the internet across smartphones, tablets, laptops, or PCs. We don't cover televisions, and we don't cover games consoles. And this is obviously not looking at sales or anything. This is purely looking at visitors to these sectors, website sectors, apps, or time spent on these categories. And what you can see from this chart is one of the big ones is travel. No real surprises here, huge losses. You know, they halved their audience across hotels, travel agents, airlines. Pretty much every category was impacted. You know, they were losing 10 million visitors between January and April when it reached its peak. Another one was luxury goods and jewelry. Again, people aren't spending on high ticket items. Ticketing as well lost over half its audience, down by 6 million between Jan and April. People aren't obviously buying tickets because there's nothing to go and see. Property was another one that really suffered, as did jobs and careers, both down significantly. Property lost nearly 5 million. And usually you'd see property quite, its peak month is around Easter time, so that's even more remarkable. A couple of other sectors, automotive was down a huge amount, maps because people weren't traveling anywhere, and sports. So really the trend that I showed in March carried on in April. It was the same 8 categories. In March, sport, there was still some sport on. What we saw in April, that there was a massive drop-off, particularly with time spent, because there was no live football for people to view on tablets or mobile devices. So average time spent was down by over an hour on sports sites and apps between January and April. And just to recap again on the 8 sectors which appeared to attract most users or time during the pandemic. Retail, food sector, both grocery and food delivery, no real surprises there. People couldn't get out as much, particularly older generations, so we're doing more grocery shopping online. People were consuming a lot more news, over an hour per month on average, but not just general news like the Sky, Guardian, and BBC, which showed some of the biggest increases, but a huge variety of sources: technology, business, political, financial. We saw massive gains for things like Wired, Reuters, FT, Politico, Tech Radar, and the likes of those, as there's more scientific news, more news about the economy, finance, and business. Social media, big increases for Facebook and TikTok. TikTok a real winner there. IM and video chat, uplift for WhatsApp and video messaging services. House Party peaked in March. It declined a bit in April, whereas Zoom and Microsoft Teams continue to grow. Hence, YouTube was the major beneficiary in terms of visitors. They grew hugely, but in terms of time, we also saw big increases for Netflix, Amazon, and also BBC iPlayer. When I spoke about health in March, it was basically people visiting the World Health Organization site, the NHS, and also online pharmacies. In April, the focus shifted a little bit more to fitness, so we were seeing increases for things like Fitbit and Strava, and also the COVID symptom tracker app in April went up to 2 million from a standing start. If you listen to my presentation last time, you'll see there's a couple of different images in there, because in March we focused on government and education. Government went up by 10 million, but then that dropped back in April. It lost 5 million of the audience it gained. So I figured for April we featured on home and garden. That's both purchasing from DIY stores online, but also looking for inspiration. So visiting sites such as Gardening World and the likes. The weather got nicer, people spending more time outside, realizing they're at home and wanted to improve their surroundings. And finally, gaming. We're not looking at games consoles here, but a big driver. A lot of the games went up, but Twitch was a big driver of time online. So that was April. What happened between April and May? Well, it's quite interesting because we've seen signs of recovery for many of those sectors which were most negatively impacted in March and April. And a lot of those sectors which benefited starting to lose the audience they gained. So just having a look at this here, this is between April and May. And what you can see, just looking at that green, whereas beforehand career services, property, automotive, maps were the big decliners, we're seeing they were some of the fastest growing. This is the percentage increase of unique visitors between April and May. So they really kind of dropped down to their lowest point in April and then started to gain. On the right-hand side, things like health, which we saw really grow, started to decrease. I think people realizing they know what the issue is now, so maybe not so focused on visiting health sites. Looking at this another way, what I've done here, I've looked at the absolute millions of people that were lost between January and April for the sites that lost most people. or sorry, not the sites, the categories. And you can see there that a lot of them are travel, online travel agents, hotel. They were losing 10, 12, 13 million people visiting that category. And then on the right, you can see what's happened between April and May. And there are some positive signs. We can look at some green. Admittedly, it's nowhere near getting back any of the audience they had before, but people are starting to think about holiday. And when you look at things like jobs, it's quite positive in terms of visitor numbers, maybe not so positive for the reason, because if people are looking for jobs, maybe that's not a positive message, but up by 3.7 million. So, and the same with property, they lost 4.8, but then in May, 2.8 came back. So ultimately, those that seem to lose have started to increase or gain a little bit of that audience back between April and May. And then if we look at those categories that grew most between January and April, on the right, this side, the green, and then you look at what happened between April and May, you can see that a lot of those that gained started to lose some of the customers or the audience they gained, particularly news. So I said before, mainly because of the aggregators, people were visiting things like more technology news, business, finance, politics. That dropped back between April and May. Maybe people were fed up with reading about it, but generally they didn't hold on to their audience. Lifestyles, food, that one there was predominantly people looking for recipes. BBC Good Food went hugely up and then dropped back. So maybe now people understand how to cook. They didn't need to keep looking in May. Beauty, fashion, that was a lot of female beauty, fashion. I think when you look at kind of videos and stuff, a lot of people looking at hairstyles and that kind of stuff. So again, maybe they understood what they needed to do and therefore didn't need to keep looking every month. This is looking at time online, and the reason I'm looking at this is really because things like social networking, news and messenger, they don't necessarily increase their audience massively between January and April because they're already really high penetration. But what they did do is they hugely increased their time online. And what you can see from this is they started to lose a bit of time online between April and May. So messenger, they're down 14%, general news down 11%, and social networking as well. So they weren't spending quite as much time on those categories as they were during the peak of the pandemic. That's because there's obviously other things like looking for property that they can do, which is seeing an increase. And obviously people starting to go back to work, maps also increasing in terms of time online. There were some categories that didn't kind of do the opposite trend. So they were increasing and continue to increase, or they decreased between January and April and they continue to decrease. And here's some of them here. So on the right-hand side, you can see those that increased between Jan and April, and then they continued that positive upward trend. And that includes weather, obviously. It's been brilliant. Home furnishing, so retail DIY, people focusing, as I said before, on their home, sports and outdoor, department stores. So all these have gained and continue to gain, whereas unfortunately, bad news for ticketing, not really positive story there. They've decreased and continue to decrease, but obviously not by so much. And also dating, another one I'm picking out there, with social distancing not being quite as easy to be out and about, meeting people in person. So if I want to summarize here, now I have got a much longer presentation which goes through all the different sites that have performed well. So if you are interested, then that has already been sent around to our database, but please do look on our website. We summarise by selecting 8 categories which have shown the most positive uplift between April and May. They would be property, and just remember this was the most negative when we looked at March and April. This was in the ones that was losing most. So after losing 4.8 million visitors between Jan and April, the property or real estate category picked up, adding 2.8 million. Career services we talked about, they added over 3 million between April and May, the highest audience in 2020. Total minutes still not quite as high as they were. A major driver fueling that increase was Indeed, added 3.7 million unique visitors, an increase of 40% between April and May, so big uplift there. Home and DIY, need to focus on that. That's continued to grow month on month during the crisis, been one of the major beneficiaries, grew another 10% between April and May, people visiting the DIY sites such as DIY.com and Homebase, Wix, the likes of those, and some of the other ones as well. I think like Wayfair and some of the more home furnishing type websites. Sport and outdoor has been another one that's continued to grow. Visitors grew by 18% just between April and May. Cycle retailers contributed strongly. There's big uplifts for things like Decathlon, JD Sports, but also I've added Halfords into that, not strictly speaking sports and outdoor, more motors, but given so many bikes I bought, it was interesting to have a look at Halfords. All the data on the specific brands, as I say, you can find in our longer deck. This is just a bit of a quick summary of what we've seen. Top 20 online clothing retailers all experienced uplifts between April and May after the sector lost 2 million between Jan and March. So people now starting to shop online for clothes. And autos, that also grew between April and May. But this was more around sites offering automotive classifieds, things like Auto Trader, as opposed to car manufacturers. So not so much the car manufacturers, but more like Gumtree Motors and, as I say, Auto Trader. Now, in terms of food retail, although visitors to grocery stores declined by 0.5 million between April and May after reaching a peak in April, we did see fast food and delivery services continue to grow. So things like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, Just Eat, and also all those fast food places like KFC, McDonald's, which lost huge audiences between January and March, started to show big increases between May and April. And finally, the audience for department stores also increased. So that's another one. That is a picture of a department store, my best effort between April and May. Argos being a major contributor, but also increases for the likes of John Lewis and Matalan. So say, if you want to look at all the brand winners, I've got separate slides for each of these. And if you are interested, we've done a series of insight pieces on the impact of COVID. This was a summary of part 3, but you can find the full decks on our website, where the website address is here. So that is it for me. If there's any questions, please ask at the end, because obviously I've delved through lots of data, so I've got lots of information in my head that's not in this deck. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Julie. It's always so interesting to hear those insights from UKOM. I will now just hand straight over to Kate at Amobi for her presentation. Kate.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Good morning, everybody. Let me share my screen. Thanks, Julie. That was fantastic. Can you see my screen, Elizabeth? Is that working?
Yes, that's working. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So good morning. My name is Kate and I head up advertising solutions at Amobi. Amobi is an independent ad tech platform. We provide holistic digital solutions to empower marketers. So what does that mean? So we work with brands, agencies and broadcasters to deliver targeted, personalized experiences to consumers at scale through the application of data and analytics to drive digital audiences. Today's presentation, I want to talk about how marketers have approached advertising during the lockdown and how we've been helping many of our clients and partners through these uncertain times with a methodical approach to realigning with new consumer realities. And Julie's taken us through a lot of data in those previous slides and looking at some of those growth industries. So it's actually fantastic, very much aligns with a lot of the content I wanted to share. So the first is a pretty scary stat, really. 50% of the world's CEOs say that diminishing demand for their products and services is the biggest obstacle to their business's viability. And just as many claim they're challenged by changing consumer behavior. So for marketers, they're faced with really difficult decisions about what to do and how to use their brand voice. What do they say? When do they say it? And what and how? So there's no one size fits all answer to this. And from what we've seen, marketers have taken very different approaches to exercise their brand voice. Some have stopped advertising, others have paused, and many continue to advertise, albeit in a different fashion. In situations like those which we face today, businesses that have the freedom and the means to make decisions on marketing can gain enormously from making the right ones for their business. Stopped. Okay, these brands, they're in survival mode. They've stopped advertising entirely. For those struggling to pay rent or to pay their employees, investing in paid advertising is unlikely to be the right decision, ethically or commercially. They really are in survival mode. There are also brands that have stopped because they feel paralyzed by what to say. They lack the data points to understand how and where and when to communicate with their customers in a meaningful way. And there are also brands that have stopped traditional marketing as they exercise good corporate citizenship. They've pivoted their production capabilities to support the pandemic. Companies such as Pernod Ricard, who converted their distilleries to hand sanitizer, and companies like Gap, who supported the cause by converting apparel manufacture to face masks. We've seen some marketers who have decided to pause and take a moment to reevaluate. some due to supply chain issues. Once the current stock's diminished, distribution is challenged, particularly with reliance on global supply and transportation. Others are conserving their media budgets to take stock on what and when to advertise, but they may lack the tools to help them navigate this new consumer reality. The final category are those that continue to advertise. Other than being in a secure financial position and continue to do so, these brands, other than being in a secure financial position to continue to advertise, brands also shared some similar characteristics. They have strong brand values that can build their solid foundation from. The advertising has been around brand building, so continuing to invest in emotional and memorable advertising to strengthen their brand position and capitalize on demand for the long term. I think we've all seen a lot of the TV ads, particularly around really truly engaging with emotional and finding content that resonates. So brand advertising is not about profiting in a recession. It's really about investing in the future to support a faster and a stronger recovery. They also want to be part of the consumer's journey. So they share an understanding of that relationship intimately so that their brands can stay in a consumer circle of trust. It's interwoven rather than through call and response. And finally, they have systems and technology in place to understand their audience. They feel confident about the messaging they create, and they seek informed, mindful consumer engagement and valuable customer experiences. Where possible, we're advising our clients to nurture and support their customers in this way. It also helps ensure they regain any lost ground quickly when it's first feasible to do so. This makes it one of the most reliable strategies available for offsetting the damage a downturn can do. And it's an investment in the short-term future that makes sense for any business that can afford it. So in the last few months, we've been working with our clients and partners to evaluate advertising strategies and media plans. So we've condensed these approaches into those outlined below, and whichever stage your company is at, the key here is about realigning your marketing and media strategies with the reality as new consumer behaviours take hold. So firstly, reassess your audience. Your audience is not the same as it once was. You need to rethink who fits into your new intent segmentation. So there's a series of questions here, and we've gone through workshops and we still are doing so with our clients to help them delve into this a little bit further. So have the disposable income and product interests of your audience changed? How have your audiences been impacted across different markets, and is that different per market? Is the mindset and experience of your audience target still changing? Is it continuing to evolve? And as we've just seen from Julie's data, it really is evolving week on week, what people are doing, how they're experiencing it, having access to that data. The answer to this is often yes. And are you looking to defend existing market share, or are you actually trying to push to win new market share? An example of how quickly your audience targeting may become ineffective is the online shopper segment. This historically has been skewed towards younger demographics and has surged with baby boomers as they shop groceries online for the first time. This is showing how even slow-moving data, like demographics, can be impacted in such a short space of time. Over the course of the lockdown, online demand for groceries surged so much that grocers doubled delivery capability for its digital shoppers. And this is not an isolated example. Worldwide, almost a third of shoppers are now buying and spending more online. So by reassessing the audience, marketers can start to find new and innovative ways to reach and engage audiences. One of the ways we've been helping our clients to do this is with timely and meaningful audience insights that are actionable. So here's just a snapshot of one of our tools, and it's looking at demographics, interest groups, ages, and what's resonating. So then looking at crafting your message. So should your messaging be updated? So it's important to assess how you communicate, as it can either be your biggest asset or an extremely costly mistake when the stakes are so high. This isn't a time for marketers to be locked in a legacy campaign and ignore or overlook how consumer sentiment and interest has changed. How have consumer sentiment shifted towards your brand and competitors in the context of this crisis? And even looking again back to Julie's presentation of that shift and how, for example, real estate was shrinking and now it's growing in a really short space of time. Are you driving brand awareness for share shift or lower funnel purchase intent? And does the tone of your messaging align with consumers' experience and the stress levels that they're feeling during this time? And or are you facing supply chain constraints that may require different messaging either by region or by market? So more so than ever, marketers are showing greater appreciation for data-driven insights to inform contextual messaging and targeting. Analytics and A/B testing are being propelled to the forefront of media planning. The pandemic here has heightened customers' expectations of brands. So Kantar, who have some fantastic stats here, 70% of consumers say they expect brands to be helpful in their new everyday. Communication was also key to how consumers wanted brands to fulfill this expectation, where only 8% of consumers thought brands should stop advertising. We're finding that owned and operated media, such as brands' websites or email channels, are great mediums for testing this messaging. And finally, realigning your media plan. Where you used to find your brand intenders likely isn't where you will find them now or in the future. One of the biggest shifts in consumer behavior the media world has seen is channel consumption. Being at home has accelerated consumer time and investment on screens, TVs, and streaming products such as Netflix and Disney+. So what strategic adjustments will help you adapt to your commercial restart? Has your audience media consumption changed? Can you first test your audience and messaging insights through your own channels? And how has your audience distribution across TV and digital changed? There's no better time than now to double down on your commitment to working media so that you can do more with less. So key takeaways: audiences have changed, behaviors are different, legacy strategies and assumptions and models need to change. Marketers who are quick to understand that doing what you did before won't get you the outcomes you desire are those who are better positioned to relaunch the big restart faster and smarter. Having the technological solutions and data-driven insights to understand consumer behavior is an asset that enables brands to be more agile, more relevant, and more effective when it comes to exercising their brand voice and audience engagement. So in summary, to survive and thrive in a pandemic post-world or any future of uncertainty, marketers need to know who the audience is today and what makes them tick, what worries them, where they are, and how you can most effectively communicate with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was so useful. Such great questions that we all need to ask ourselves when we're thinking about our consumers. So thank you very much for sharing that with us today. Next on the agenda is Peter from GumGum. So hi, Peter. Hopefully we can see your screen shortly.
Hopefully I'm in. Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Bear with me 2 seconds. Right, hopefully everybody can see that.
We can, yes, thank you.
Cool, thank you. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out today. So as was said, I'm Pete from GumGum, so head up the UK office over here, and I'm going to talk to you about our Neuro analytic study of contextual ad effectiveness. It's a bit of a mouthful, and it probably sounds a bit like something out of a sci-fi movie, which actually, if you look at the way that the study was conducted, it kind of looks a little bit like it too. But I'm going to give you a bit of a spoiler. What I'm really going to be talking about in this and what the study found out is that contextual ad effectiveness is brilliant, and actually it's something that we should all be considering, and you know, it's really a solution that people should be thinking about, particularly in the wake of the death of the cookie and various other things going on in the industry that I'll talk about. But I guess sort of this is a bit of a nice precursor to Mike coming on to talk about the attention economy and sort of the Attention Council. I guess what I want people to pay particular attention to is the methodology that we took to undertake this study, the results that came out of it, and sort of, you know, moving away from linear metrics to something a bit beyond that. And then also just, I guess I want people to come away with a bit more of a detailed understanding of sort of the capabilities of the contextual space versus what people might have in their mind from from historic days through to actually what is possible now. Hopefully that's good with everybody, and I will crack on in. So look, just a very quick sort of experiment that probably works a little bit better in person or on something like a Kahoot, but I will do this very quickly. I'm going to show everybody a little snippet from a piece of content. I'm going to show it within sort of 3 seconds, and then I'll move on to the next snippet, and then I'll move on to the next snippet. What I want you to think about is at the point that you actually understand or you think you have an idea of what the content that page is talking about. So hopefully that makes sense. So here I go, 3, 2, 1. I would imagine off the back of that, many people probably don't have an understanding of what the content is as yet. And then I will put on something next, 3, 2, 1. So coming into imagery and sort of, the image that was associated to that content. And then finally, 3, 2, 1, the headline. I guess what I'm trying to get to here is sort of, I would hope that in my academic mind that very few people will understand or realize what the content was about when I show the body of the text. When I show the imagery, actually that probably piques up a little bit more interest and a little bit more knowledge about what the content is talking about. And then when you add in the headline, actually, if you give yourself a sort of a couple of extra seconds, actually that gives you the possibility that you truly understand what the content is talking about. The reason that I'm discussing this is that when we think about context, historically, this would have just very much sort of geared itself towards individual keywords, the body of the text, and sort of very base understanding. In terms of the way that we as humans process content, actually, we're looking at the entirety of the content, whether it be the imagery, whether it be the header, whether it be the video, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I guess what I'm trying to get to is that we need to move beyond this idea of context is just about text, and actually it's about the entirety of the web page and taking a true full understanding of that. It's also about understanding the sentiment of the text. So again, alluding to this idea of sort of where I believe context needs to get as a business. So just very quickly about who GumGum are. So we are a contextual business using AI technologies to scan and understand content on a page. So that's using a combination of natural language processing, so sentiment analysis, understanding the tone of text and various things like that, through to image recognition, so actually scanning images on a pixel by pixel basis to understand everything that is contained within a web page. Then we deliver what we say is beautiful ads, and then finally looking at how we drive performance, particularly around attention and building trust within our user base. It's enough of the sales pitch, so I'm just going to move on to sort of why we should all be considering context. So, I guess we're going through fairly turbulent times at the moment. So, as an industry, as a society, there is an awful lot going on right now. I think everybody can agree that it's been a pretty rubbish 2020 so far. And that's had various different impacts on the way that we need to associate or the way that we need to deliver media. So first of all, I'm sure everybody has read around the idea that the third-party cookie is going to be got rid of fairly soon, driven by Google Chrome particularly. A lot of our technology and a lot of our targeting methodologies as an industry has been very heavily driven by cookie-based targeting. So if we think about behavioral targeting, again, it's sort of historically very much geared towards cookie-based targeting. And actually, if you get rid of the cookie, then scalability of behavioral data becomes very challenging. Advertisers and leaders, what are they asking for? So people are asking for brand safety. People are asking for quality content. People are asking for sort of control over their content. So there is a big shout out from the industry and industry leaders for this need for what contextual fundamentally drives. And then the last thing about it being timely. So as I mentioned, sort of, it's been a torrid 2020 so far, from COVID-19 through to, the recent sort of Black Lives Matter movement, which, has obviously been a brilliant movement and an amazing thing to happen. But when advertisers have been considering content to appear against, it's sort of, it's been a little bit sort of contentious in terms of the way that advertisers are trying to sort of focus on sort of supporting quality journalism whilst trying to, in their mind, maintain the integrity of sort of brand safety and appearing against content that they want to do so. And we've done a lot of research as a business to identify and understand actually the brand safety of individual individual keywords and sort of pages that might be discussing COVID-19. And when we did this, actually, we found that over 60% of content that talks about COVID-19 in sort of a base level would be deemed brand safe. So again, it's this idea that sort of contextual capabilities and using sort of modern day context can actually cut through this idea of sort of blanket keyword blocking to actually open up a lot more quality journalism to sort of support quality press and make sure that we're not sort of making these sort of blanket moves to block every piece of content around a certain subject matter because there's a feeling that it might be contentious. So what's new in contextual? So sort of, again, thinking back to sort of, old day contextual, most brands won't want to appear against sort of a sexually driven content and it will be deemed to be non-brand safe. But again, old school contextual targeting would have looked at individual keywords. So if I said the word breast for the sake of argument, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're talking about sex. It could be around, I'm going to the supermarket to buy 10 chicken breasts. So actually, we need to move away from this sort of crude level of contextual targeting that there would have been previously, where we're talking about site level analysis or page level analysis based on individual keywords. So moving on, sort of, site level analysis, where we just sort of go and create a blacklist of sort of content that we don't want to appear against. You hear about advertisers that just go forth and block all news-based content, which again, we should be able to dig into individual page level content to understand, is something brand safe? Is it not brand safe? And again, let's support quality journalism. Let's identify content that sits within these high news brands that is brand safe and that we should be appearing against. So coming down to sort of URL level analysis. So this goes back to this idea of sort of, when I'm talking about chicken breasts or, the word crane for the sake of argument. Does the word crane allude to a building site, or are we talking about sort of twitching and bird spotting? We need to move beyond this. And then sort of next level, so page level text analysis is kind of what I'm alluding to there. But, again, is it positive sentiment? Is it negative sentiment? Actually, is there other things on the page that creates a little bit more of a polarizing view? Because I don't know, you're on a celebrity news site, and actually the imagery there might not necessarily be appropriate because it's got overexposure of skin. And this is kind of what takes us to what I believe is should be sort of sophisticated contextual based analysis. So looking at text plus images with machine learning. So when we think about content and contextual analysis these days, we should very much be thinking at this level. So, I'm sure everybody sort of who's here at the moment, whether you're an advertiser, whether you're an agency, or whether you're an ad tech provider, you'll all be talking about brand safety solutions in some way, shape, or form. They will all be using some level of contextual analysis, and the majority of them now are using natural language processing at some level to make sure that the sentiment of a page is on point with where it needs to be, not just looking at individual keywords. Where we really want to take this to the next level is where we start looking at content level analysis that I've alluded to before, where we're sort of discussing, what's within the imagery, what's within the video of the content, etc., etc. So actually trying to take more of a human level view of what is contained within content and targeting that accordingly. Hopefully all of this makes sense and I'm not just sort of rambling on too much. It feels a bit unnerving looking at a screen and chatting to people. But look, this is sort of what I'm getting to. So this for me is what full level page analysis should appear like. So what you'll see here is an article from the New York Times. So, quality journalism. So then we start to analyze the page level text analysis. So looking at the headline, looking at the body of the text, and then full page analysis, looking at the imagery that's contained within that text or within that article. So look, I get to the interesting bit now in terms of the analysis and the research that we did. So I would argue that a lot of studies around sort of performance, around how different targeting works, around how different creative has worked in the past has very much been driven by linear metrics. And hopefully I'm in sort of good company right now to sort of suggest that, we should be moving beyond linear metrics. So, if you think about sort of some of the IAB content that's come out in the past, ranging from sort of don't be a clickhead, so let's remove CTR from all of our measurement, through to, I'm sure what Mike will talk about with regards to the attention council and sort of moving beyond those sorts of linear metrics and looking at how attention and emotion can actually sort of drive and give us a gauge of sort of performance in various different ways. I guess for me, I get on my soapbox a little bit when we talk about linear metrics, and I want us to be able to prove what the 99% of media that wasn't clicked on actually achieved. It can't be that, we only task a campaign towards CTR, because then what value are you giving to everything else that occurred across the campaign? You can't be sat there as an advertiser going, actually, I don't care what the 99% of my budget did. But then it's the vast majority of what you delivered. So look, what we did here is we teamed up with a company called Spark Neuro. I'm going to read this out a little bit because some of the terminology is a little bit beyond me. But so Spark Neuro specializes in applying neuroscience to measure emotion and attention for optimizing advertising and entertainment. So what we did with these guys is we conducted a global study working across 3 different markets, the US, the UK, and Japan. We got 60 participants, and they were all sort of exposed to the same study components. So first of all, they were hooked up to 4 biometric sensors. Like I said at the start, this is like something a little bit out of a sci-fi movie. So EEG monitoring for brain activity, GSR for facial coding to gauge emotional responses, and eye tracking to evaluate attention. They were then given a subconscious influence assessment, establishing baseline metrics for brand affinity and purchase intent. And then next, participants were asked to read 6 articles on different topics. Each article featured 3 ads whose relevance to the article content ranged from high to low. For example, an article about soccer. You can tell we're a US business. It featured a clothes brand, a drinks brand, and a consumer electronics brand. So going from high relevance to low relevance. And then what we did is, using those sort of 4 sensors that I talked about at the start, we sort of looked to get a gauge for the level of attention that was given based on sort of, brain function, based on facial coding, based on eye tracking, various different elements like that. And then at the end of the experiment, what we did is we conducted in-depth interviews with the participants to understand sort of, I guess, more of a qualitative understanding of what they took away from that experience. Hopefully that all makes sense. And like I said, it's a bit of a different way of sort of conducting analysis on sort of the performance of, I guess, targeting methodology, but across sort of media in general. So again, sort of very much looking at how we can move beyond this idea of linear metrics to sort of really understanding emotional response to different types of advertising. So look, what we therefore understand off the back of our contextual experiment. So look, there was much higher neural engagement off the back of this when people are exposed to contextual ads versus totally irrelevant ads. So 43% increase in terms of neural engagement, more memorable. So, I guess actually this came back from some of the qualitative analysis that we did. But when we talked to people about sort of their experience, and they were very much saying, when I'm in sort of football content, actually, obviously my mindset is in and around that type of content. I want to be delivered ads that are, at the right time, at the right place, when I'm in that certain mindset. And for me, that is why we therefore drive more memorable ads off the back of sort of, delivering a contextually relevant ad based on the content that somebody is reading at that given point. And then, look, the last thing that we saw was that there was a definite increase in purchase intent across the board when looking at contextually relevant ads. Again, this idea of somebody being in a mindset around a certain topic, of course, you would assume that they're going to be more inclined to discuss or sort of be within the mindset to purchase something that they are reading around at that given time. It makes very sort of clear academic sense. So look, like I said at the very beginning, sort of this experiment was very much to do with sort of analysing and understanding the value of context. And sort of what we found out, therefore, is sort of it drives increased levels of attention, it drives increased levels of engagement, and it gives you a good steer on things far beyond just looking at a CTR metric or a CPA metric. Actually, we're looking at longer term affinity and a longer term effectiveness of driving contextual relevance to an individual user. So hopefully this has given you a bit of a steer of sort of the value of context, the value of what it can actually deliver, and also maybe a little bit of insight in terms of what we can be doing above and beyond just sort of looking at base level metrics to sort of understand value, understand performance of campaigns. So that is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really interesting. And those stats at the end really just speak for themselves about how effective contextual advertising can be when you get it right. So thank you very much for that. What I'm going to do now is move to Mike at Lumen, who is going to talk to us about the Attention Council. Mike, good morning.
I'm just now struggling to.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Right. I don't know if you can. Let me see if I can. I've clicked on a button which I apparently I can't turn my computer my camera on, so I'm sorry about that. But let me share a screen. Okay, can you see that, guys?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Let me put it on the full screen for you. So, yeah, I'm going to speak. I'm a bit quicker than other people because I just wanted to just tell you about the Attention Council. So this is just an update about what it is and an invitation for people to get involved if they want. So many of you may have heard about the Attention Council as a thing. The first question people say is, what is the Attention Council? It's a little bit like Fight Club. The first rule of Attention Council is that you don't talk about Attention Council. But we do have a point. The Attention Council is designed to bring together. It's a talking shop. It's a forum for talking about the issue of attention to advertising. So we bring together ad industry professionals, academics, technology vendors and marketers to form thought leadership. And we try and tend to get lots of people from the buy side, from brands and from agencies to come together to talk about this. It seems that the brands themselves are perhaps the most concerned about the difference between things, impressions, and then viewable impressions, and then viewed impressions. And the difference between those things is something that is a particular concern if you're buying stuff. But it's also of some concern if you're selling good quality stuff. So people just talking about the New York Times, or I'm sure the same would be with the Guardian or the News UK or ITV's BVOD or what have you. Attention to good quality media is much better than ads that run on crap quality media. And so this is as an issue, it's something that unites both the advertisers but also quality publishers and the intermediaries in between that. So we bring all these people together to promote the ethical use of attention metrics to create incentives that align everyone together. We're strong believers in the fact that there's a virtuous circle here where good publishers create content that is worth looking at, and because it's worth looking at and because it engages people, the ads that run next to those that good content tend to get much more attention. And this is true not just for digital media, but also seems to be true for TV and for out of home and even for print, that the ads that run next to the articles with the most engaging content, or the ads that are most prominent and in the best locations, do get more attention. They do work harder. So there should be a strong alignment in motivation between high quality media and sellers of high quality media and buyers of high quality media. Although the Attention Council does have a sort of an emphasis on the latter, on the buy side. So what we do is we get together and share research. and talk about the issues around it. So we've had 3 meetings so far. One in New York at LinkedIn's offices, and then another one at the Guardian's offices in April, to which many of you probably came, and then just recently we had a virtual one, and we'll probably carry on doing virtual meetings for a while because of COVID. But at these meetings we talk about the issues around attention, share some insights that we've got, that all the different members, bring and share some research about attention. So just like stuff that GumGum have just been talking about there, and the research like that, just so that we're all aware of what's available. Talk about the methodologies. Attention is an evolving area. There are lots of different ways of measuring it, and so just sharing knowledge about that is quite useful and quite helpful. And then applying standards as well. And these, it's important that when we go out to the market, we talk about research and issues that are the research methodologies are of high standards, and the quality of the research is of a standard that people can actually trust. There's an awful lot of research that is partial or designed just to prove one point. It's important to make sure that we can trust that this research makes sense. But also it's important to make sure that we maintain very high ethical standards as well. I mean, one of the things that Pete was just talking about was how lots and lots of ad tech seems to perhaps inadvertently promote the very worst forms of the internet. You don't intend it to be like that, but that is what happened. And there just seems to be a tendency towards that in most technologies that get applied. So the founders of the Attention Council, right from the very start, said, how can we make sure not just that the research standards are high, but we can build an attention ecosystem that has the highest ethical standards as well. But in large part, it is a talking shop. It's a way of bringing all these things together. There are no fees, there are no dues, no one pays to be part of it, and you don't, just occasionally you might have lunch bought for you if you turn up to a meeting, but that's about it. The founder members are all companies that have a particular interest in attention. So Lumen, you may know, I'm Mike from Lumen. We're an eye tracking company. And we have a technology that turns your webcam on your phone or a computer into an eye tracking camera. The Centre for Amplified Intelligence is run by a lady called Dr. Karen Nelson Field, who's recently written a book called The Attention Economy and How Media Works. She's another respected authority in the field of attention studies. The third company is based in New York. They're called Adelaide. Rather confusingly, they're called Adelaide and they live in New York, whereas Karen Nelson Field is from Adelaide and lives in Adelaide, but runs a company called Amplified Intelligence. But there we are. So Adelaide are a sort of a measurement a company that uses data from Lumen and other sources to do media planning based on attention. T-Vision is a company that does the same sort of thing as Lumen, but for TV. They put little webcams on people's computers, on computers' TVs, and then they're sort of like the Barb Panel Plus. They have large panels in the US and in Japan and India, and they sort of measure the actual attention that TV ads and Lumen's data and TV's data sort of align very much. And then lastly, Avocet, which is a DSP based in the UK. That uses some of Lumen's data to do attention targeting. But we might have been the start of it, but recently we've had a flurry of people joining. Sorry, there's someone arriving at the door. And like I said, we tend to have many people from the buy side. So lots of people, there's people from Electrolux and Anheuser-Busch, Tesco, British Gas, lots and lots of, and as well as there's Mars, Microsoft, Diageo. So lots of brands there, but equally some media agents as well. So people from Dentsu, Havas, we've got people from Omnicom and PhD joining, and then we've also been lucky enough. I'm an ex-DDBer, and we've Lumen sort of comes out of DDB. So we're lucky to have we know Les Burnett as a personal friend, and he's been happy to join, which adds further credibility to it. So we have lots of personal members, and if you're interested in joining, send in your details. We'll see if we can find a place for you on the council. I thought perhaps just quickly, we've recently done some research amongst members and respondents about what they think about stuff. Our membership at the moment, so we've got about 200 people have come up to our events. We had a quick response at the end of the survey, the last one. 85 people responded. Most of the people come from media agencies and brands and ad tech, although there's some from research agencies and media owners. We asked them, how familiar are you with the variety of attention metrics that are out there? What's interesting is that people are on a journey here. They're sort of learning. It's a growing area. What's interesting from this is that certainly amongst the brands and the media agencies, far more people who are actually thinking about this or using it right now. Either Lumen data or data from T-Vision gets used either in just planning or in actually buying, using the sort of attention algorithms that we can provide. But while this is a growing thing, it's strongly amongst the people who turned up to the attention council, I remember. So this is people who think that attention might be important. They think that attention is probably going to augment and potentially replace other metrics in the way that Peter was just talking about. But amongst a very, very high selected group, there's quite a lot of enthusiasm for it. And lots of people seem to be quite happy to think about using attention to guide and to inform media planning. Finally, from this, it seems that amongst the people who've been turning up to our meetings, remember, that's who we were talking about here, there seems to be an assumption that attention needs to, will catch on, but over a longer period of time. The pace of, we sometimes say that we live in a time of unprecedented change and speed of development and stuff like that. Historians amongst us would say that probably that isn't true. Things move very slowly. In reality, people might want things to change quickly, but they rarely do. But I think what's interesting about that is that there's a general consensus that this is an important issue, but it's also an issue that people are slowly learning more about. There's no point in us shifting all our metrics until we know more. And so that's why we need to have more research, more discussion, more definition to try and better understand these issues, which is why we have the Attention Council. So like I said, there are no dues, there's no money. Anyone can turn up to the events, and so please send on your emails through Steph or through Tom at the IAB or direct to me at Lumen. We can make sure that you're as part of any event. We have a council, a sort of smaller inner group of people, which is about 20 people strong at the moment. If you fancy, put your name forward for that. And we'll see if we can consider you. We, as you saw, like many councils, we have an awful lot of old white men. I'm a middle-aged white man, though you can't see me. So we are particularly interested in hearing the perspectives from people with different backgrounds, to us from different countries, different ethnic origins, obviously more women, as well, and people from, especially those from different educational and industry backgrounds as well. The more diverse that the council can be, the better it is, because the council exists to have a conversation, and the conversation will be more interesting and more valuable if we have more points of view and different perspectives. Great, so I'm going to hang around for questions at the end. But like I said, if you do want to join or you want to know more, Steph has the details and you can always get in touch with me at Lumen. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was really interesting. And yeah, as Mike said, do get in touch with him if you're interested in getting involved in the Lumen, in the Attention Council. But you can also contact any of us at the IB and we'll pass your details on to Mike. So next up, we've got Teresa and James at Kantar. So welcome to both of you. Hopefully we get to share your screen very soon.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. All right, let me just try and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
We can see that, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant, okay. Fantastic.
It's on presenter mode at the moment, so you might just get it on full screen.
Just gonna, right, okay. So yeah, good morning everyone. So my name is Teresa Baldock and I'm a client director at Kantar. And I'm joined by my colleague James Barker, who's also an account director. So today we're going to take you through. Sorry, my notes are funny. Today we're going to take you through the new findings into consumer trust taken from our recently conducted flagship Dimension study titled Media and Me. So our Dimension study is a huge piece of research that we conduct annually. And this year it's broken down into 3 separate reports. So they are advertising, audiences, communications. Trust in advertising and media is one of the biggest challenges to overcome. And over the next 15 minutes, we're going to take a look at the state of trust today and what the opportunities are to address the issues. So just a quick run through of what we'll be talking about today. So we're going to start with some context around our findings, so how we undertook the research, etc. Then we're going to look at the findings themselves around trust in advertising. We'll also explore trust beyond advertising and how it impacts media more generally. And then of course we'll explore how the industry can and is responding to the threat. So trust has been quite a key theme running through our Dimension study. As consumers use more and more personal devices, there are increased opportunities for ad personalisation, which creates both challenges and opportunities in the media industry. So consumers are already very uneasy about being retargeted with online advertising, and this feeds into a broader sense of distrust and sensitivity around privacy. So just a quick word on how we undertook the research to start with. So we conducted the research across 8 of the biggest ad spending markets around the world on a representative base of adults aged 18 plus who are internet users through at least 2 connected devices. This was on a sample of 8,000, so around about 1,000 of each in each of the markets. And just a quick word on fieldwork. All of the research was undertaken before the COVID lockdown. But in fact, in this new normal, it's more important than ever for us to understand the fundamentals of consumer engagement with advertising. So to complement the quantitative consumer behavioural and attitudinal data, we also interviewed 37 industry practitioners to find out their opinions and perspectives. And these included senior figures from brands, agencies, media and platform owners, trade bodies, consultancies, and ad tech businesses. So we're just going to move on now and take a look at the consumer's level of trust today. So we start with a look at consumer attitudes towards being targeted based on online activity. And this is a big issue for consumers. So here we have the figures for 8 markets as a whole and also separate for the UK. And we can see that 60% of connected consumers in this country say that they find it intrusive to get advertising based on past online activity. And of course, this isn't a new phenomenon, but it's also a phenomenon that's not going away at the moment or anytime soon. And angry and distrustful consumers are disengaged consumers. And this is particularly an issue in this country versus the 8 markets as a whole. And in fact, we are generally more cynical and distrustful of advertising in the Western markets, Europe and the US, than in the more rapidly emerging markets of China and Brazil. And beyond the dissatisfaction, we can see that around 3/4 of connected consumers explicitly say that they see the same ad over and over again, and it's too repetitive. So that's quite a huge proportion. And we have a quote here from one of our industry leaders, brand director from P&G and LATAM, who acknowledges the issue and admits that they've been guilty of it in the past. So the issue is not a new one, but solving it remains a challenge that we as an industry haven't yet successfully tackled. So the next chart sums up one of the key reasons why this issue has remained, and it has to do with the connection between relevance and privacy. On one hand, many consumers want the relevancy. So as we can see, the figure is somewhat lower in the UK than the 8 markets as a whole. But again, we can probably put this down to consumers here being more cynical towards advertising, full stop, whether it's relevant or not. And then on the other side of the coin, we also see well over half of consumers say that they're concerned that more tailored content may compromise their privacy. And this has been the dilemma facing the industry, how to give audience the relevance without compromising their privacy to do so. And after all, you can't provide relevancy without understanding in detail who you are targeting. So, of course, much of what we see, much of what we've just seen around trust relates to advertising directly, and particularly online advertising. And it's really interesting to look at where the advertising sits contextually amongst a range of different touch points consumers say that they trust for information on brands and services. So in this chart, we've got what we call a trust score. And all that is a calculation built by dividing the number of connected consumers who say that they access a particular medium by the number who say that they trust it, which gives us then a sense of scale of trust. And when it comes to trust, advertising is firmly at the bottom. You'd expect the likes of friends and family and review sites to score quite highly when it comes to trust. And then we've got the likes of news sites and printed newspapers and magazines, which have a relatively high trust score. And then it begins to drop quite quickly, with social media platforms and advertising considerably lower. And this is key because brands want to benefit from the halo effect. Oh, sorry. Going too far back. So yeah, now I'm lost, bear with me. Oh, sorry. So appearing in trusted media helps, but it doesn't solve the main issue of consumers' dislike of online retargeting and how it impacts their privacy. So where does the answer lie? Well, much of it lies with how the data is collected in the first place. What consumers don't like is the deterministic data. That's to say that the cookie-based data that's set to serve them ads based on their online journey. So we all click on accept cookies without thinking too much about it. If you didn't, you probably wouldn't make much progress in your web browsing in general. But consumers feel that this is all very underhand. Yes, they may have by letter of law given cookie permissions, but of course they haven't really consciously done so at all. So when they see ads for that barbecue or a pair of shoes that they've been looking at, following them around the internet, they feel that their privacy has been infringed. If, however, we focus our energies on the probabilistic data collection, we can sidestep these concerns. Through the probabilistic path, a representative sample of consumers have consciously and willingly signed up to a survey or panel, and they better understand how their data will be used. So beyond simply resolving privacy and trust concerns, this probabilistic data also gives considerably more holistic understanding of the consumer beyond what deterministic data can provide, and therefore enabling more effective and creative means of engaging a particular consumer target. And this is something that we at Kantar have been exploring to a greater extent in recent years, and has led to developments including TGI audiences for activation, which bridges the gap between media planning and programmatic media buying. It uses targets built on Kantar TGI consumer data, and it carries them through to the online media activation systems. So I'm now going to pass over to my colleague James, who's going to take a look at building consumer trust in media beyond advertising. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Teresa. I'll just give you a nod when the slides are up.
No problem.
Cheers. Morning, everyone. As Teresa said, I'm just going to, in this part of the presentation, build on what we've just looked at to examine what we as an industry can do to go about building consumer trust beyond advertising in the most fundamental form. And so we can see, just on this slide, we're examining some other where privacy concerns come up. And you can see it extends just beyond advertising in the most direct format. As you can see, 58% of UK consumers worry that content in general tailored towards them might infringe on their privacy and put them at greater risk. And that's not just referring to standard advertising. It can be things like Netflix or Amazon Prime show recommendations, because the suggestions there are based on an algorithm which is looking at how you're using that particular video streaming service. And of course, another aspect is targeting through promoted content on social media platforms. And the charts here show that UK consumers are really not happy about that. 70% of them don't trust a lot of what they're seeing on social media platforms, and that's a real concern. And it can have a huge impact on their trust. Next slide, please, Teresa. And so, looking at one of those marketplaces that we talked about, SVOD, in an increasingly crowded marketplace like video streaming, it's going to be those players that can respond most effectively to consumer concerns and build an interface that truly gives them what they want in terms of content and advertising. They're going to be more likely to succeed in the long term. And here we've just got a variety of attitudes that we took from the study into SVOD services and the use of those services. And I think it's particularly significant that 43% globally and 37% in the UK say that they spend too much time searching for programs to watch in the services. And also a third generally say that recommendations provided by those services are just not relevant to them and not useful. And so begs the question that what if consumers could be recommended more relevant shows and they could find them more easily at the top of the pile, and we could do this through richer, more holistic understanding of what their behaviour is and why they're doing it, rather than just their actions within a particular platform. So obviously there are limitations with the algorithms in these platforms. And that dilemma is summed up neatly in this quote from Christine Kurtz at Viacom CBS, who says that algorithms are only going to be able to take us so far. Not only can they leave consumers feeling a bit uneasy about privacy encroachments, but by their very nature, they can only offer a very narrow view of the consumer's content consumption. And thus the recommendations can only be as good as the limited information which is fed into them. And that goes back to the slide that Teresa went through on deterministic and probabilistic data. How we feel from off the back of Dimension the importance of moving the pendulum towards probabilistic data, so you'll be able to get beyond that walled garden and give insights into why of consumer behaviour rather than just the what. And so obviously there are some practical steps we as an industry can make around this to give the consumers the relevancy they want without alienating them and chipping away the privacy concerns and the already existing low trust that they have with advertising. And the fix that we would propose off the back of this would be growth through collaboration. Right, Teresa. Bingo. And so obviously a big question of that is how we get beyond the issue of algorithms that are confined within a walled garden. And if you have the active collaboration across the industry, which means agencies, advertisers, media owners, and research agencies like Untitled, all working together with the aim that is in all of our interests, really, which is engaging consumers effectively and making sure that those privacy and trust concerns are looked after and taken into account. And this view of working together in a greater collaboration is shared by Louis DeComo, Executive Vice President for Global Media at Unilever, in the quote on the screen. And so there's issues around online targeting, and there's quite a lot of different elements of that. It can be advertising fraud, it can be targeted through clickbait articles that kind of get in the way of your browsing experience, and as simple as consumers just not engaging enough due to the constant retargeting of advertising. And this has put increased pressure on marketing teams. And there's a growing sense that advertisers need to get more involved in the whole process, and more, because of this, have been making moves to take more direct control over the execution of their media strategy. And this Involvement and engagement can help directly address some of the pressing issues and can lead to more effective advertising. And you can see in the quotes here from GSK's media director, he says that they're taking more direct control of the media investment. And there's also a quote here from P&G, who we've heard from already, about a move towards co-locations. So literally bringing the agencies into the office and making sure those teams can work more closely together. This better aligns the client and agency teams, drives greater collaboration, and can achieve the aim of more relevant and engaging advertising and marketing for their target consumers. Now that's just a kind of a little snapshot of the full dimension reports that we have available. I hope you've enjoyed it, and there's much more available. We've got 3 themed reports. We've touched on the advertising and the audience reports here. There's also one into communication. But I'd encourage you to check out all the reports that are available on the website shown on the screen now, kantar.com/dimension. And then reach out to Teresa or myself or anybody you know at Kantar if you want to talk about the findings a bit further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, both Teresa and James. That was really, really useful. And obviously that 2-pronged approach of how to stay relevant, but at the same time, considering consumer trust is such an important aspect for everyone who's working in media and advertising. So thank you very much for that. Now, last but by very no means least, we've got Alex at Unruly. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
I think, Teresa, you need to stop sharing.
Sorry.
And then Alex can say his.
There we go, sorry.
No worries at all. I'm just going to press this button and hopefully it works as it should. Can you guys see this then?
We can, yes.
Awesome. All right, let me just move around my Zoom bar. Okay, cool, good to go. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. My name is Alex, as said, and I work in the Insight team at Unruly. For those of you who aren't aware of who Unruly are, we're probably best described as video advertising specialists. So essentially, we help brands to get their video ads seen by consumers across a number of different screens, be that connected television or a desktop, laptop computer, or even a mobile phone. And in the Insight team, we're basically constantly running research to better understand what makes good video content. And today we're here to talk about one of those pieces of research. Before we start, we'll probably get the bad news out of the way, that as consumers, you and I are not as rational in our decision-making processes as we'd like to think. And the reason for this is because our brains are very, very lazy. They're great at doing lots of things, but they're also very, very lazy. Our brains are constantly looking for shortcuts, so they can reduce the amount of energy that they're using. And they're doing that for our own benefit because it makes it easier for us to navigate the world quickly and effectively. And as I said before, and really we've been running research to better understand how marketers can better engage our lazy brains using video advertising and a mental shortcut known as the peak end rule, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So what is the peak end rule? It was coined by the Nobel Prize winning behavioral psychologist, who I'm sure everyone here is aware of, Daniel Kahneman. And the theory behind the peak end rule is that we judge experiences, whether they're positive or negative, based on how we feel at the peak of that experience and the end, instead of judging the experience as a whole. So if you think about a trip to a restaurant, which seems somewhat alien now, but yeah, if you try and cast your minds back to a trip to a restaurant, if your starter was late and the main dish is smaller than expected, this will matter less to us in hindsight if the dessert is amazing and the manager provides a complimentary drink alongside the bill. And the reason for this is because our brains are lazy. They don't function like video cameras. We do not have the cognitive capacity to remember everything, especially unsatisfying meal choices. Instead, we use the peak and the end of an experience as a proxy for how we felt about the whole thing, and then we forget the rest. And we forget the rest, sorry. So in other words, how we felt at those 2 points, the peak and the end, will dominate our memory of the whole experience. And that's incredibly important, the incredibly important part of the heuristic, because as humans, we feel first and we think second, and this has huge implications for advertisers. And there are many great studies that have demonstrated the power of emotional advertising, landmark studies such as Binet and Field's IPA work. Even the recently launched Cannes Creative Ladder is a really good example that shows clearly how effective emotionally powerful advertising is compared to rational advertising in the long run. And heuristics such as the peak end rule can help to explain why ads make people feel strong emotions and why those ads are more effective. So yeah, we ran some research at Unruly to assess the relationship between emotion and memory on video advertising, because as I said, this has huge implications for advertisers, because if feelings at key points in the ad can influence its emotional appeal and memorability, then our understanding of if and when those points occur becomes critical to not only assessing the creative, but also to maximizing the effectiveness of the ad through the use of creative edits. So to do so, we worked with Richard Shotton, who is the author of The Choice Factory, book that came out in 2018. Thoroughly recommend it if you have not read it. And we worked with Affectiva, a facial recognition company, to understand whether or not the peak end rule holds true in advertising. And we designed an experiment where we showed over 1,200 respondents 9 different video ads, which were categorized and identified using Affectiva's emotional AI tech. And then we surveyed those respondents a week after exposure to assess which ads were remembered and which elements of the ads were better remembered. And the key part of the study design was the categorization of the ads. So using Affectiva's facial coding, we could essentially track the emotions felt by respondents as they watch the videos based on changes to their facial expressions in real time, which again sounds like another piece of sci-fi, since Peter's point before. But what that meant is we could see if, as people were watching the ads as the people were watching the ads, we could see whether or not they were smiling, whether or not they were frowning, whether or not they looked surprised, or whether or not they looked angry. And we could see where those moments of emotion occurred. And doing that meant that we could then categorize the ads into 3 specific groups. So videos without emotional peaks, so very evenly scored videos, videos with multiple emotional peaks throughout the video, but none at the end, or a very muted one at the end, and videos where there was only 1 peak and it was the highest peak that occurred at the end. So if you think about that, that would be the difference between the even emotional score, is like a control group, and then the other 2 are groups that are representative of a peak end video experience. And after we showed the 1,200 respondents these videos, we recontacted them and we followed up with a recall and recognition survey to understand a week later which of the ads were the ones that stuck in the memory, what part of the ad stuck in the memory, and was there any difference when we compared them across the categories. And thankfully, thank God, the results showed clear support for the power of emotion in driving memorability and for the preferential role of emotional peaks. So in the recognition part of the survey, we showed respondents images from each video and asked them which of these images they remembered seeing in advertisements that they were shown the prior week. We also included red herring images as well, just to really make it as clean an experiment as possible. And yeah, this is probably one of the most important findings, because we saw that respondents were statistically significantly better at recognizing the imagery if it came from a video that provoked a emotional peak, whether or not that peak came in the middle or at the end. So this not only has implications for video advertising just as a whole, but it also highlights the potential value of using display formats, so image-based formats, as a way to amplify the awareness of a video campaign. Because based on this research, we know that if you take a still from the peak of a video, the still where the moment of which someone is feeling a peak positive response, if you were to run that across display, for instance, that's still maybe with a bit of editing, including some logos or a brand bar, that's a really good way to refresh the memory structures of the video itself. We also looked at brand recall, and we found some really interesting data on the balance between branding and emotional response. This is probably one of the top 3 questions we get from clients is, where should I put my logo? How should I be branding my video? What do I do, basically? And yeah, this research has provided some really good useful nuggets of information to help answer those questions. So going beyond recognition, the same respondents were also asked which brand each video was for. And again, the recall was significantly higher in the adverts, which produced moments of peak emotional intensity, as you can see on the slide. But further analysis showed that the success of the ads wasn't just down to the sheer amount of emotion produced, but whether or not the brand was present during those peak moments as well. So in order to understand, if you think about it, the ads, your video advertisement has to be entertaining, it has to be emotionally engaging, but also it has to remember that it's an advertisement, and at its core, it's doing a job to increase awareness for a brand and push sales and profit in the long term. So the best ads are the ones that are aware of both of those things, who can not only tell a engaging narrative, but also are able to weave the brand into that narrative in a way that feels natural. And the ads that performed the best in this test were the ones where the brand was not only present at the moment of peak emotional response, but also responsible for. So the brand's distinctive assets or packagings were responsible for a punchline in the joke for one of the ads we tested, for instance. But in order to understand whether there was any bias caused by existing brand awareness, we also asked a creative awareness question, whereby we cued the respondents with the brand name and asked them to tell us everything they could remember. So we moved away from not focusing on image-based stuff with recognition or category cues. We just simply said to them, last week we showed you an ad for this brand, tell us everything you can remember about the creative. Because what we were suspicious of is that brand recall was maybe higher for the brands where there was higher existing brand awareness, which we collected in the first study the first survey, before we actually showed them the video. And there was a slight trace of this. What we did see is that creative recall does fluctuate with emotional response, but similar to existing research from Nielsen in 2015, and there's a great piece of research from the Bass Institute in, I think it's 2017 actually. We saw that creative recall decays almost immediately following exposure. However, that decay is significantly weaker for videos which feature an emotional peak. So this is just simply asking people, please tell us everything you remember about the brand video that we showed you last week. When we go into that, because the creative recall was an open-ended question, so we had to delve quite deep into those open ends to determine whether or not the recall was accurate or not. And once we did that, we saw that although we saw that the difference in accurate claimed recall was again significantly improved in the ads where there was a peak emotion either in the middle or at the end of the ad. And another thing we saw is that although, as I said, there was some existing brand awareness that influenced the respondent's ability to recall the ad, existing brand awareness did not have an impact on their ability to remember creative details, for instance. So there were ads that we tested where in the control group, they performed well for brand recall because the brand was one in which the majority of people would associate with headphones, for instance. But then when we said to people, okay, tell us everything you remember about that headphone brand ad, all of a sudden those respondents were, the details completely eluded them. Eluded them. So this is a really interesting piece where we found that, it is possible to, if your existing brand awareness isn't incredibly strong, it's definitely possible to build those memory structures using emotionally powerful advertising in the long run. And these results are clearly in line with the peak end rule in that ads with moments of high emotional intensity, as measured on the face, are more likely to be remembered, and specifically key creative detail is more likely to be remembered in the ads which provoke an intense emotional response. So, as I said before, viewers have very selective memories. So whilst it's important for your video to be well branded, to maximize the memorability, it should also create those moments of intense emotional response. And the best videos are the ones that combine both of those into an engaging, well-branded narrative. This is a quote from Richard Shotton, who was a consultant on the project. Sorry, and yeah, again, his point in that this experiment does clearly demonstrate that the peak end rule plays a role in advertising effects, and it's something that advertisers need to take into account when creating and optimizing copy. We all know that there are creative devices which adverts can rely on to boost effectiveness, and it seems like the peak end rule is one such creative device. So if we want to engage consumers with our ideas, emotional intensity is critical, and if we want those brand ideas to persist in the memory, then they need to be captured in the peak emotional moments of the ad. So just some recommendations from me. I think I'm still good for time, but the results of this experiment, as I said multiple times already, followed the peak end rule hypotheses almost exactly, as the memory of each viewing experience was significantly correlated with the level of emotional response recorded. We also know that it is possible to predict the chance of your ad being remembered based on the type of emotions it provokes. So videos which elicit intense feelings of amazement, surprise, and hilarity. These are videos which are all better equipped for memory than those which fail to produce a meaningful emotional response, for instance. So there is also a balance of system 2 and system 1 response that you can use to predict how memorable your video will be based through the use of content testing, which takes that dual process theory into account. Another thing we found is the power of narrative was incredibly apparent. So in the videos that we tested, some of them were emotional roller coasters where there were multiple peaks, which, as you saw in the categorization, but it's also possible to build to a single emotional peak at the end of your video as a way to enhance the chances of recall. So that just shows you there's more than one way to create an effective video which is going to last long in the memory. It can either be an emotional roller coaster, or it can be, if you think about a John Lewis video, for instance, most of the time they're quiet. The emotional peak occurs right at the very end, for instance. So whilst it's easy to overlook the branding element when we're talking about creative and to focus on the enjoyment aspect, it is very important to ensure that your brand is both present and responsible for the peak moment, to both associate the brand with a positive response and to amplify awareness. So as I said, it's all about using video creative as a way to boost awareness, but also to create those positive mental structures around the brand, so that when people see your brand mentioned, in a non-video based environment, they think back to the positive feelings that the video made them feel at the time of exposure, which is what we saw in the creative recall part of the survey. And another really interesting point on duration, which is the original test for the peak end rule, the original experiment was actually based on duration in the 1990s with Daniel Kahneman. It was all about how long people spend with their hands submerged in cold water, for instance. So the whole basis of the peak end rule originally was based on duration, and we found very similar, less similar, not similar in terms of we made the respondents dip their hands in water, but we did see some duration effects as well. So while longer edits had more time and space for the emotional peaks to occur in the middle, so longer edits had more time to be able to create a peak, drop it down again, and then create an even bigger peak using, by amplifying the previous ones. But it is still possible to create an incredibly memorable ad in a shorter time environment by focusing on a single peak at the end. So it shouldn't be a question of I can only do, I've only got a choice between one long asset being incredibly emotionally powerful or a shorter asset not. You can do both using the peak end rule as a creative device for both. And you can identify the effectiveness of both using content testing that takes that into account as well. And that's it. That's the research that we ran this research in February this year. And that already feels like a lifetime ago. But if anyone has any questions or comments, more than happy to catch up on it after this as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was really, really interesting, and great tips at the end about how to use emotion and branding to get your desired outcome. So thank you very much for that. I think for everybody on the webinar, we are slightly overrunning. So what we're going to do, I think, is not go to a Q&A session now. But if you do have any questions for any of the speakers this morning, please do send them through to, you can send it either to me, Elizabeth, at iabuk.com, or anyone at the IAB, and we can forward them on to the relevant person and hopefully loop you in so you can get those questions answered. But thank you all very much today for coming on to the webinar. A special thanks to our speakers this morning for a fascinating set of insights, and I hope you all have a very good rest of the day. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
guys.